The sound of flesh striking flesh cracked through the ballroom, louder than a gunshot. In the center of the room, time seemed to freeze. Aaliyah Brooks stood with her chest heaving, her hand still raised. She was a stark contrast to the glittering crowd around her, a young black woman in a simple, severe black and white maid's uniform. Her natural afro, usually pulled back, framed her face like a halo of defiance, the only soft thing in a room full of hard edges. Opposite her, clutching a cheek that was rapidly turning red, stood Seo-Yeon Kim, the Ice Princess of Seoul. She was draped in a white designer evening gown worth more than Aaliyah made in 5 years. Her sleek, expensive hair was messed up, flying across her face from the impact. Her eyes weren't just wide, they were shattered with disbelief. A waitress, a foreigner, the help, had just struck the fiancé of the most dangerous man in South Korea. The hundreds of elite guests held their breath, waiting for the execution. They looked to the left. Jin-Ho Park, the Mafia Boss, stood there. He was tall, dressed in a suit blacker than the night, his arms crossed over his chest. His expression was terrifyingly calm. He didn't signal his guards. He didn't reach for a weapon. He just watched Aaliyah with dark, calculating eyes that held zero anger, and a terrifying amount of respect. They thought she was invisible. They thought because she wore a uniform and scrubbed their tables, she had no voice. They thought she would break under the pressure of their cruelty. But they were wrong. Hey, beautiful souls. Welcome to the story of the slap that brought an empire to its knees. If you love stories about the underdog biting back, justice being served cold, and a romance so forbidden it burns, you need to subscribe right now. Grab your drink, get comfortable, and let me tell you how a waitress from Nigeria took the crown from a mafia queen. The Onyx wasn't just a nightclub, it was a cathedral of sin built on the most expensive real estate in Seoul. Neon lights reflected off the wet marble floors, and the air smelled of expensive cologne, old money, and danger. Aaliyah Brooks was on her knees, scrubbing a spill off the VIP floor. Her knees ached, and the stiff collar of her black and white uniform dug into her neck. She was invisible here. To the wealthy patron stepping over her like she was a piece of furniture, she wasn't a person with dreams, or a woman grieving her father, she was just a pair of hands holding a rag. You missed a spot, a voice dripped from above, cold and sweet like poisoned honey. Aaliyah froze. She knew that voice. She looked up to see Seo-Yeon Kim standing over her. Seo-Yeon held a half-empty glass of red wine. With a lazy flick of her wrist, she tipped the glass, letting the dark liquid splash onto the floor Aaliyah had just cleaned. It splattered onto Aaliyah's pristine white apron. Clean it again, Seo-Yeon commanded, not even looking at Aaliyah, but checking her reflection in a compact mirror. And make sure you don't look me in the eye this time. It's disrespectful. Aaliyah's grip tightened on the rag until her knuckles turned ash gray. The urge to snap, to stand up and scream that she was a human being, burned in her throat. But she thought of the debt collectors back in America. She thought of her father's legacy. She swallowed her pride. It tasted like bile. Yes, ma'am, Aaliyah whispered. As she scrubbed, she didn't see the man watching from the shadows of the upper balcony. Jin-Ho Park, the owner of the city, was leaning against the railing. He wasn't looking at his fiancée, the beautiful Seo-Yeon. He was watching the girl with the afro and the steel in her spine, wondering how long it would be before she finally broke, or before she finally fought back. 2 weeks later, the air in the Onyx felt heavier, charged with the static of Seo-Yeon's foul mood. Aaliyah was restocking the bar when the crash of shattering crystal silenced the room. Near the VIP entrance, Mrs. Han, a grandmotherly cleaner with a hunched back and trembling hands, stood frozen amidst a sea of broken glass. Seo-Yeon loomed over her, a predator smelling blood. "Are you blind as well as stupid?" she hissed, her voice cutting through the ambient jazz. "That was a vintage Grand Cru. It's worth more than your entire life." Mrs. Han bowed so low her forehead nearly touched the wet floor. I am sorry, Miss Kim. I am so sorry. Sorry doesn't pay for the carpet, Seo-Yeon spat, raising a manicured hand as if to shove the elderly woman. The security guards looked away, eyes fixed on the walls. No one dared interfere with the boss's fiancée. No one except Aaliyah. Before Seo-Yeon's hand could make contact, Aaliyah was there. She didn't run, and she didn't shout. She moved with a fluid, silent grace, stepping explicitly between the heiress and the cleaner. Aaliyah dropped to one knee, not in submission, but to start picking up the largest shards of glass with her bare hands. It was a heavy tray, Miss Kim, Aaliyah said, her voice steady and surprisingly loud in the hush. She looked up, her dark eyes locking onto Seo-Yeon's furious gaze. I'll take care of the stain immediately. Mrs. Han needs to check the kitchen inventory. It was a dismissal, wrapped in the guise of servitude. Aaliyah gently touched Mrs. Han's arm, guiding her away from the line of fire. Seo-Yeon blinked, taken aback by the audacity of the interruption. She looked at Aaliyah, then at the watching patrons. To continue screaming at a cleaning lady while a younger waitress cleaned the mess would make her look unhinged rather than powerful. Filthy things sticking together, she muttered, kicking a shard of glass toward Aaliyah before turning on her heel. High above in the shadows of the mezzanine, Jin-Ho Park watched the entire exchange. He had expected the American waitress to cower or quit by now. Instead, he watched her check Mrs. Han's hands for cuts, offering a soft smile that transformed her tired face into something radiant. For the first time in years, Jin-Ho felt a flicker of something dangerous in his chest. It wasn't pity. It was admiration. The summons came before Aaliyah could even tie her apron strings. The floor manager, a man who usually looked at her with disdain, was now looking at her with nervous sweat beading on his upper lip. Upstairs, he muttered, thrusting a gold-trimmed key card into her hand. VIP Section 1. Master Park specifically requested the new girl. Aaliyah's stomach dropped. The VIP floor wasn't just a promotion, it was the inner sanctum of the syndicate. Access was restricted to the most trusted staff, or the most disposable. She wasn't sure which one she was. Stepping off the private elevator felt like entering a different world. The thumping bass of the club downstairs was replaced by a suffocating silence, broken only by the clinking of ice and low, murmurous conversations. The air smelled of Cuban cigars and aged scotch. Men with jagged scars hidden beneath Italian silk suits sat in leather booths, their eyes tracking her every movement like apex predators watching a gazelle. Aaliyah kept her chin high, balancing the heavy crystal decanter on her tray. She approached the central booth where Jin-Ho sat. He was surrounded by lieutenants, but he seemed entirely alone, a king bored by his own court. As she poured his whiskey, her hand trembled slightly, just once. Jin-Ho's eyes, dark and unreadable, flicked to her wrist, then up to her face. He didn't speak, but he didn't dismiss her either. He simply watched, his gaze heavy and intense, acknowledging her presence in a way that made the hair on her arms stand up. She retreated to the service station, her heart hammering against her ribs, only to find her path blocked by a wall of white silk. Seo-Yeon stood there, her arms crossed, her perfect face twisted into a sneer of disbelief. She looked Aaliyah up and down, inspecting the uniform, the hair, the skin, as if Aaliyah were a stain on the architecture. Do not mistake his curiosity for kindness, Seo-Yeon whispered, stepping close enough that Aaliyah could smell the expensive jasmine of her perfume. To him, you are a novelty. A pet to look at because you are different. But pets that forget their place get put down. Seo-Yeon reached out, tracing a sharp, manicured nail down the lapel of Aaliyah's uniform, dangerously close to her throat. This floor is my kingdom. One mistake, one spilled drop, one wrong look, and I won't just fire you. I will make sure you never work in this city again. Do you understand me, girl? Aaliyah met the woman's cold stare. She didn't bow. She didn't flinch. I'm here to do a job, Miss Kim, she said evenly. Just like everyone else. Seo-Yeon's eyes narrowed into slits. She hadn't gotten the fear she wanted. We'll see, she hissed, turning away. We'll see how long you last in the viper's nest. The club had emptied out hours ago, leaving behind only the ghost of cigar smoke and the scent of stale ambition. The cleaning crews had already swept through the lower levels, but on the VIP floor, one shadow remained. Jin-Ho sat in his usual booth, his tie undone, staring at the amber liquid in his glass as if it held the answers to questions he refused to ask. Aaliyah moved quietly around the periphery, collecting empty tumblers. She was exhausted, her feet throbbing in her worn sneakers, but she couldn't leave until the boss did. That was the rule. She approached his table cautiously, intending to grab the empty decanter and retreat, but his hand shot out, covering the rim of his glass. Leave the bottle, he said, his voice rough with fatigue. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot but piercing. And get another glass. Aaliyah hesitated. I'm on shift, sir. Drinking is against protocol. I am the protocol, Jin-Ho countered, the corner of his mouth twitching upward in a humorless smile. Sit. It wasn't a request. Aaliyah retrieved a glass and slid into the booth opposite him, keeping a respectful distance. He poured for her, the dark liquid swirling. Why do you stay? He asked suddenly. You work harder than my lieutenants, yet you are treated like a ghost. Why not go back to America? Aaliyah swirled her drink, watching the light catch the crystal. Because ghosts don't have debts, Mr. Park. But I do. My father left a mess behind. I'm just trying to clean it up so I can sleep at night. Jin-Ho took a slow sip. Debts, he murmured. We are all paying for the sins of our fathers, aren't we? The silence that stretched between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was heavy with recognition. For the first time, Aaliyah didn't see the terrifying king of the underworld. She saw a man who was profoundly, aching lonely. He was surrounded by an army of guards and sycophants, yet he had no one to speak to. You have everything, Aaliyah ventured, emboldened by the whiskey. Power. Respect. A fiancé who rules society. At the mention of Seo-Yeon, the air around Jin-Ho turned frigid. He set his glass down with a sharp clack. I have a merger, he corrected, his voice devoid of warmth. Seo-Yeon's family controls the shipping ports. My family controls the streets. It is a business transaction wrapped in silk and pretending to be a marriage. It keeps the peace. It keeps my people alive. He looked out the window at the sprawling city lights of Seoul. It is a cage, Aaliyah. Just gilded. Aaliyah looked at him, really looked at him, and her heart gave a traitorous thud. She realized then that the calm, cold expression he wore wasn't arrogance. It was armor. He was just as trapped in this glittering tower as she was in her debt. Maybe, Aaliyah whispered, meeting his gaze across the table. Maybe it's time to break the lock. For a second, the mask slipped completely, and Jin-Ho looked at her with a raw, terrifying intensity. Be careful, Aaliyah, he warned softly. If you break the lock, you might get eaten by what's inside. The following Saturday night, the Onyx was a cacophony of wealth and excess. Aaliyah moved through the VIP section with the focus of a tightrope walker, balancing a tray containing a crystal bottle of Louis XIII Black Pearl, a cognac worth more than most cars. She was passing the main thoroughfare when a flash of white silk cut across her peripheral vision. It happened too fast to stop, but slow enough for Aaliyah to feel the malice behind it. Seo-Yeon, laughing at a joke from a nearby table, took a sudden, calculated step backward. Her shoulder drove hard into Aaliyah's arm. Aaliyah twisted, trying to save the tray, but gravity was unforgiving. The bottle hit the marble floor with a sickening, expensive crunch. Amber liquid, $30,000 worth, exploded across the floor, soaking the hem of Seo-Yeon's gown. The music didn't stop, but the VIP section went deathly silent. "You clumsy, stupid girl!" Seo-Yeon shrieked, jumping back and playing the victim to perfection. "Look what you've done to my dress. Look at this waist." The floor manager, Mr. Choi, materialized instantly, his face pale as he surveyed the wreckage. He looked from the fuming Seo-Yeon to the horrified Aaliyah. "I didn't," Aaliyah stammered, her hands shaking as she reached for a napkin. She stepped back. "I couldn't." "Are you blaming me?" Seo-Yeon's voice rose an octave, trembling with feigned indignation. "Mr. Choi, is this how your staff takes responsibility? By blaming the guests?" Mr. Choi turned on Aaliyah, his eyes hard. He had a mortgage, he wasn't going to cross the boss's fiancée. "That bottle is $30,000, Ms. Brooks. Per your contract, damages caused by negligence are deducted from your wages." Aaliyah felt the blood drain from her face. 30,000. That wasn't just a debt, it was a death sentence. It would take her years to pay off. She would default on her father's loans. She would be deported. Her life in Korea was over. "I can't pay that," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Then work it off," Seo-Yeon sneered, smoothing her dress. "Or find a new rock to crawl under." For the next 2 days, Aaliyah worked in a haze of panic. She picked up double shifts, skipped meals, and calculated every one, but the math never added up. She was drowning. On Tuesday, she was summoned to Mr. Choi's office, expecting to be fired or handed a payment plan that would starve her. Instead, Mr. Choi slid an invoice across the desk. "Sign here," he muttered, not meeting her eyes. Aaliyah looked down. The invoice for the bottle was stamped in red ink, paid in full. "I don't understand," she said, her brow furrowing. "Who paid this?" "An anonymous patron," Mr. Choi said, though his nervous glance toward the ceiling told a different story. "Consider yourself lucky. Now get back to work." Aaliyah walked out onto the mezzanine, clutching the paper. She looked up toward the private observation deck. Jin-Ho was there, standing in the shadows, his expression unreadable. He didn't wave or smile. He simply nodded, a microscopic dip of his chin, and turned away. The relief that washed over her was quickly replaced by a terrifying realization. He had saved her, yes. But in doing so, he had just declared a silent war on his own fiancée. And Aaliyah was the battlefield. The annual Syndicate gala transformed the Onyx from a nightclub into a fortress of diamonds and death. Every major crime family in South Korea was in attendance, their rivalries temporarily sheathed beneath tuxedos and ball gowns. For the staff, however, the night was a marathon of terror. One spilled drink or misplaced glance could result in a disappearance rather than a dismissal. Aaliyah moved through the crowded ballroom with military precision. Her uniform was pressed sharp, her face a mask of professional detachment. She had spent the last week looking over her shoulder, waiting for Seo-Yeon's next strike, but the fiancé had been uncharacteristically quiet. That silence, Aaliyah would soon learn, was not peace. It was the deep breath before the plunge. While Aaliyah was occupied refilling champagne flutes for the Incheon cartel bosses, Seo-Yeon slipped away from the head table. She moved not toward the powder room, but toward the service corridors. The hallway was dim and smelled of industrial cleaner, a stark contrast to the perfumed air of the ballroom. Seo-Yeon wrinkled her nose in disgust as she located the row of battered metal lockers. She knew exactly which one belonged to the American girl. With a quick glance to ensure the hallway was empty, Seo-Yeon pulled a diamond cuff worth $250,000 from her wrist. It glittered maliciously in the flickering fluorescent light. She slipped the jewelry through the vents of Aaliyah's locker, hearing it land with a soft clink inside the girl's open tote bag. A cruel smile touched her lips. This wasn't just about getting a waitress fired anymore. This was about erasing her. 10 minutes later, the ballroom music cut out abruptly as a piercing scream shattered the atmosphere. It's gone. My diamond cuff is gone. Seo-Yeon stood in the center of the dance floor, clutching her bare wrist, her face a portrait of frantic distress. The room went deadly quiet. Jin-Ho was at her side instantly, his expression darkening. Are you sure you didn't leave it in the suite? He asked low, trying to contain the scene. I had it on 5 minutes ago. Seo-Yeon cried, her voice rising so every don and capo in the room could hear. She spun around, her eyes wild, pointing a trembling finger at the line of servers standing near the bar. One of them took it. I felt someone bump into me near the kitchen doors. Aaliyah felt the blood drain from her face. She hadn't been anywhere near the kitchen doors in 20 minutes, but she saw the traps snapping shut. Search them, Seo-Yeon demanded, her voice turning hard and commanding. She looked directly at the head of security. Lock the doors and search every bag, every locker, and every pocket. No one leaves until I get what is mine. Jin-Ho looked at his fiancée, his eyes narrowing slightly, detecting a performance, but he was cornered. In front of the syndicate, he couldn't let a theft go unpunished. He gave a curt nod to his men. Search the staff quarters, Jin-Ho ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. As the guards marched toward the back, Aaliyah stood frozen, a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She knew, with terrifying certainty, exactly what they were going to find. The head of security marched back into the ballroom, his boots clicking ominously against the marble floor. In his gloved hand, held aloft for the entire syndicate to see, dangled the diamond cuff. It caught the light, glittering like a cold star. We found it, Miss Kim, the guard announced, his voice devoid of sympathy. Deep inside the American girl's tote bag. The air left Aaliyah's lungs as if she'd been punched. Hundreds of eyes, belonging to the most dangerous predators in Seoul, swiveled toward her. She shook her head, taking a stumbling step back. No, she whispered, her voice trembling. No, I didn't. I swear I didn't touch it. You swear? Seo-Yeon laughed, a brittle, cruel sound that echoed in the silence. What is the word of a thief worth? She turned to the police commissioner, who was watching from the sidelines with a glass of champagne. Commissioner, I want her arrested immediately. I want her in a cell tonight and deported by morning. It's a setup. Aaliyah cried out, her eyes darting frantically to Jin-Ho. The boss stood just behind his fiancée, his face a mask of stone, offering Aaliyah no lifeline, no signal, nothing. Mr. Park, please. You know me. You know I wouldn't do this. Stop begging, Seo-Yeon hissed, closing the distance until she was invading Aaliyah's personal space. It's pathetic. But I suppose it runs in the blood. I had my people look into your file, Aaliyah. Your father didn't just die poor, he died a failure who couldn't pay his debts. A cheat and a liar, just like his daughter. The mention of her father struck Aaliyah harder than any physical blow. Her grief was the only thing she had left, the only thing she had kept sacred in this city of vice. Don't you talk about him, Aaliyah warned, her voice dropping to a low tremor. I will speak however I please to the help, Seo-Yeon spat. She reached out, her fingers curling around Aaliyah's bicep. Her nails, manicured to sharp points, dug into the soft flesh. She squeezed and yanked, digging in harder. You are dirt. You are nothing. You are a stain on my floor. Aaliyah gasped as pain flared hot and sharp. Seo-Yeon ripped her hand away with a violent jerk. Aaliyah looked down at her arm. 3 bright red lines of blood were welling up where Seo-Yeon's nails had torn the skin, the crimson striking a violent contrast against the white sleeve of her uniform. Something inside Aaliyah snapped. It wasn't a loud crack, but a silent, terrifying severance of the tether that had held her fear in place for months. The fear of deportation, the fear of the debt collectors, the fear of the men in suits, it all incinerated in a flash of white-hot rage. She looked at her own blood, and then up at the triumphant, sneering face of the woman who thought she was untouchable. No more. The sound of the slap reverberated through the ballroom, louder than the shattering glass from weeks before. It was a clean, vicious connection that snapped Seo-Yeon's head to the side, sending a spray of spit and shock flying. Aaliyah stood with her hands still raised, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with a fire that terrified the room. For a heartbeat, the entire syndicate was paralyzed. The orchestra stopped mid-note. The clinking of glasses ceased. Seo-Yeon staggered back, clutching her stinging cheek. Her perfect mask of composure shattered completely, revealing the ugly, trembling rage beneath. She looked at Aaliyah with the eyes of a demon. You filth! Seo-Yeon screamed, her voice shrill and breaking. She spun toward Jin-Ho, pointing a trembling finger at Aaliyah. Did you see that? She struck me. In front of everyone. Jin-Ho, kill her. I want her dead right now. The demand hung in the air, heavy and absolute. The security guards shifted, hands hovering over their holsters, waiting for the signal. Aaliyah didn't run. She didn't beg. She straightened her spine, wiping the blood from her arm onto her apron, and stared directly at the Mafia Boss. If this was the end, she would face it standing up. Jin-Ho stepped out from the shadows of the head table. He moved with a terrifying slowness, like a dark tide rising. He walked past his screaming fiancée, past the stunned police commissioner, and stopped directly in front of Aaliyah. He looked down at her. His face was unreadable, his dark eyes searching hers. The room held its breath, waiting for the violence. Waiting for him to protect his family's honor. Jin-Ho turned slowly to face the room. He looked at the guards, who instantly lowered their weapons. Then, he turned his cold gaze upon Seo-Yeon. You asked for justice, Jin-Ho said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the silent hall. I asked for an execution. Seo-Yeon shrieked. She is a thief and she assaulted me. She is not a thief, Jin-Ho corrected calmly. The evidence is right there. Seo-Yeon gestured wildly to the diamond cuff in the guard's hand. We found it in her bag. Jin-Ho crossed his arms, the ghost of a smile touching his lips, not of humor, but of finality. I know where it was found, Seo-Yeon. But I also know how it got there. He let the silence stretch, tightening the noose around her neck. She didn't steal it. I saw you plant it. The footage from the corridor security cameras is already on its way to your father, Jin-Ho continued, his voice devoid of pity. The Kim family has disgraced itself. The alliance is dead. And so is our engagement. Before Seo-Yeon could scream, two of Jin-Ho's personal guards, men who had bowed to her only an hour ago, gripped her arms. There was no gentleness this time. As they dragged her toward the exit, her heels scraped uselessly against the marble, her white gown tangling around her legs like a shroud. Her shrieks of entitlement faded into the night, leaving a ringing silence in her wake. The room remained frozen, hundreds of eyes darting between the boss and the waitress. Jin-Ho turned to Aaliyah. He reached into his jacket pocket, but instead of a weapon, he pulled out a folded piece of paper, her contract. With a flick of his lighter, he set the edge aflame, dropping it into an ashtray where it curled into ash. You are free, Jin-Ho said softly, speaking only to her. Your father's debt is erased. There is a plane ticket to Chicago waiting in my office. You can leave this city, Aaliyah. You can leave the darkness. Aaliyah looked at the ash, then at the door where Seo-Yeon had vanished. She thought of the fear in the staff's eyes, the cruelty of the elite, and the lonely man standing in front of her who had burned her cage to the ground. She realized that walking away meant leaving him to the wolves. She took a step forward, crossing the invisible line between servant and master. And if I don't want to leave? Jin-Ho extended his hand, palm up. An invitation, not a command. Then stay. Not behind me. Beside me. Aaliyah placed her hand in his. The warmth of his grip anchored her. He led her not to the exit, but to the center of the VIP dais, the throne Seo-Yeon had guarded so jealously. Aaliyah sat, smoothing her black and white skirt with dignity. She didn't look imperious or cruel. She looked around the room and offered a small, terrifyingly calm nod to the musicians. The music started again, but the atmosphere had changed. The terror was gone, replaced by a new, hushed reverence. The waitress was gone. The queen had arrived.